Great. Well, welcome. And I assume you can still hear us on the call there in Zoom. Just a thumbs up if you can. Great. Fantastic. Well, everybody, welcome. Thank you for joining us during the Open Education Week. We assembled this talented group of individuals to help step us through some approaches to advocating for OER on your campus. This is supposed to be a student-centered event, and so we have many student perspectives, and I want to make sure that we save room for students to ask questions as well and put things on the table, because we have some experts in the room who would be very qualified to help us answer those questions. My name is Spencer. I work at the Colorado Department of Higher Education. One of the major initiatives that I work on is open educational resources, which we are talking about today. And again, the idea for today is to give advocates the tools that they need and to enter into discussions around affordable textbooks on campus. And hopefully participants will gain a better understanding of what OER are and strategies for encouraging positive change with faculty, staff, and administration on campus. And so I'm going to start by introducing our panelists who are involved in some capacity, either in their campus or at the state with OER work. And so first we have Alana Lipscomb from PPCC and UCCS, our student representative from the OER Council. Hey, Alana.
Hello.
And we also have Ryan, who's a student here at ACC. Hey, Ryan.
Hello.
Thank you. And Dan Balsky, who's the Director of Student Life here at ACC. Dan, thank you for joining us.
Hello, welcome. Hello, hello.
And we also have Brittany Dudek, who is the Library Coordinator for Colorado Community Colleges Online. Hello.
Hello.
Thank you for joining us. And finally, last but not least, we have Professor Jonathan Poritz, faculty member at CSU Pueblo, who's joining us via Zoom. Hey, Jonathan.
Hello.
There's the wave. Okay, great, fantastic. So now that we have gone through the introductions, I'm going to use our little slideshow that we put together as like a guide, but really it is more of an intimate conversation, obviously. So I'm going to kick it over to Alana.
Do we know how many students are on the phone? Or?
Yeah, we have, so yeah, we could probably just introduce everybody else who's here too. Would you like to do that?
Yeah.
Okay, great. So Asia, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. Hello, everybody. My name is Asia Sanders. I am a student at UCCS, and other things I've done, I actually ran for office last year for the state legislature. That's pretty much about me.
Cool.
Very cool. Welcome. And Ben, would you like to introduce yourself?
Well, sure, no problem. Hello, everybody. My name is Ben Jenkins. I had recently received a certificate program at ACC, and I used to be at sound engineering, and but otherwise I had done some other opportunities for the ACC staff, for example, the foundation, and for other sorts of programs that they would hire me for because of my musical talent. I'm a pianist, and recently I have been like in the home and garden shows, but otherwise I just have been recognizable to the music department at ACC. So yeah.
Awesome. Thanks for joining us, Ben. And how about here in the room? Anybody else want to? Lisa.
Oh, one more thing. I know one thing about Dan Balsky. I had been in the NSLS with him. I forgot to mention that.
Awesome. Okay. Thank you, Ben. And I saw that we had another person log in and log out. Elle, I saw you logged in, so hopefully you can join us again later on. So, Alana, kicking it over to you. I think you have some questions.
Yes, I do. So I would like to know from the student perspective, what is the most expensive book that you've ever had to purchase textbook-wise?
So the most expensive book I ever had to purchase textbook-wise was a $180 book for a zoology course. I ended up returning because I didn't actually need it for my degree, thank God. But yeah, that's $180, and I actually just spent $120 on a psychology textbook this semester.
Wow. Now, when you sewed that book back, was it opened or unopened?
It was open, but honestly not that much.
So how much like what range did you get when you sold it back for the book buyback?
I got a fraction. Probably, I think $30 for it.
How angry did that make you feel, knowing that you spent $180 for a book that you didn't use in class? You sell it back and you get $30.
Yeah, I mean, it's, you feel worked over a little bit, to say the least.
What about anybody else on the phone? What's the most that you spent on a textbook?
Well, so far as back as I can remember, the most expensive textbook that I got so far was the music business textbook, and I couldn't remember if it was exactly about like $75 or so. But yeah, it was just a pretty pretty massive kind of musical textbook that we musicians have to handle, and then it was like, oof, how we're going to handle all this.
So Asia here. I spent 1 year, probably about 2014, 2015. I spent like 200 something on a book. It was mind you, it was a what do you call it? Like one of the loose leaf pages, that you can put into a binder. It's like $200 something, and we barely even used it. So that really bothered me. It's like sociology or something.
And were you able to sell that book back?
No, because it's loose leaf.
Loose leaf, right.
Fantastic.
What about the books that you get that come with a course code that you probably never even use? The actual book, but you've got to pay for the course code. How do you feel about that you can't sell the book back because you've already opened the course code? Makes you pretty upset too. So
seen some nods. Been there, done that. Sounds like.
Kind of hits you in the gut because you're paying so much for your tuition, and then you have to turn around and pay for the materials for the class. So if there was a situation where you were able to have the textbook at minimal cost, but also have it for free, if you wanted it in print, it's like less than $20. Would that be the option you would go if you were able to see that when you're applying for your courses and signing up?
Yeah, I still have a print copy.
Definitely. I'd even spend $50 if all of my courses, were like that.
So what did you want as far as like the next person talking?
Yeah, I mean, no, I think that kind of was just helping us to set the tone for the conversation. So I think we're moving into, one thing I wanted to share. This is a slide that I threw in because some students at UNC put together this activity along with the librarian. And so you'll see the slide that I'm showing right now. They asked the students coming in the library, if you didn't have to buy textbooks, you didn't have to buy that loose leaf, Asia, you didn't have to buy that $200 loose leaf sociology textbook, what would you be using that $200 for, right? And there's some funny, like very college student answers on here, like beef jerky and beer, or makeup is on there. But most of them are my pad, rent, housing, food. I mean, if you look at the sticky notes that are up there, and I don't know what you all would spend that money on, but I'm willing to bet that it's probably one of those answers that's shared up there too.
Yeah, necessity.
Childcare.
Yeah, childcare, another one. Yes, another big one for sure. So necessities, right? And so it's not that the books aren't a priority. You're prioritizing the books over some other things, or you're having to, come up with additional funds for those other things that are also priorities. So just wanted to throw that out there. I think we're kicking it over to Brittany, who's going to tell us are we kicking over to Brittany?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, great.
So hi everyone, this is Brittany. I think that many of us in the room probably are familiar with the term open educational resources, but I think it's important to set the stage and make sure everyone's kind of talking about the same thing before we get a whole lot deeper. So for most places, kind of the preferred definition of open educational resources is from the Hewlett Foundation. And that says that open educational resources are the teaching, learning, and research resources that reside in the public domain, or they've been released under an intellectual property license that permits their free use and repurposing by others. So for us in education, that means that it could be a full course Course materials, such as modules, assignments, textbooks, streaming videos, tests, software, and pretty much any other tool, technique, or material that's used to support the access to knowledge. So that basically means anything that you might use in your course to support learning can be considered an open educational resource. Now, at different institutions, that means different things. An OER course or a ZTC course or whatever other term you want to use is going to generally mean that there's no textbook cost associated with that course. So you still have to pay tuition, but you don't have to buy a book. Some places, that means that it's going to be low cost also. And that really just depends on the institution. So your institution could decide that an OER course is also less than $30 or less than $50. In some places, it's free. It really just depends. And since this is open to people from across the state, we really can't say that for sure it means a free course, free textbook materials, and you won't pay any cost. So I think for our purposes, we'll say that it's free, no textbook cost?
Yeah,
okay.
What I've been saying, and this is me as an agent of the state, it's free or very, 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 very low cost. And by that I mean maybe the cost of printing, right? So that is my expectation. That's actually what's written in the state statute. And so that's the working definition that we're working with.
Yeah, and I think that's pretty safe. I think that most places, when they're doing that low-cost alternative, they're doing, courses where there's no textbook costs. They're also doing courses where there's very, 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 very low-cost courses, and then there's regular courses. And usually they're designated different ways when you register in Banner, but sometimes they're not. So that's why I just think it's important to know that sometimes you get free, sometimes you get low cost, and sometimes you get regular. Sometimes that includes things like lab kits. So if you're taking like a science course, you might not have to buy a textbook for your biology course, but you still might have to pay for a lab kit fee. Just kind of depends again. But I think it's a pretty good deal if you're not buying the $120 biology textbook, but you've got to buy the $30 lab kit or something like that. So that's just kind of to set the stage. Are there any questions at all about what that might mean, knowing that it might be institution specific?
I have one as well.
Sure. Yeah.
If I was an OER course student, and if it says that no textbooks are required and it's absolutely free, do you suppose that you could do your own research online, depending on what kind of course you are at? Or you can also just use like a notebook, college ruled, or just any other source of kind of material you need? So
I think so in most OER courses, well, let's say this. In every course you're going to take, you're still going to be given resources to support what you have to learn. So in an OER course, you might be given an open textbook that's free. And you're still supposed to read it. You're still supposed to learn the material that's in it. You might be given a number of links to library journals, to library ebooks, to websites, to videos to watch, things like that still support what you're supposed to learn. The only difference is that you don't have to pay for those materials. So you are still, I think it would be fantastic if you want to go and find your own resources to support what you want to learn in that course. But your instructor is still going to say, here is a resource, read it for chapter 1 or read it for module 1. So they're still going to give it to you. They're not going to make you do the work of finding it yourself. They're still going to do that for you. You just don't have to pay for it.
Oh, yeah. That's just exactly what I was thinking about, because suppose unless if there are any charges, depending on any course as well, like besides textbooks, I know that the reason it's called open educational and it's open, but suppose if you complete a course at any specific time, you can also get any extra costs depending on the bills or whatever you could get. Or is it the other way around?
So Ben, are you talking like student fees or other fees that appear on your bill as a student?
Well, right, like by order of the education department.
Through your, so kind of like additional fees that aren't necessarily tuition, but aren't necessarily textbook costs.
Oh, okay, well.
Is that what you're saying? Well, I think that there are still, you know, as a student, there are still some things that you have to pay when you go to look at, when you go to the bursar's office and you make your, you know, your payment for the semester. There may be other student fees, or if you've charged to your account, you know, student parking or things of that nature. Those are the supplemental kind of fees that I'm thinking of that are not necessarily associated with a course or open educational resources, but are still the responsibility of the student. You know, maybe other services that you're having charged to your student account. So those are kind of something that we would consider either student fees or other fees that are associated with your experience as a student, but not necessarily associated with the class that you're selecting through open educational resources. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does.
Okay, great. And that's a great point. Thank you for reminding us of that, because there are sometimes other, you know, other associated fees that we see on our bill as a student. And honestly, I think you should be asking what are those as a student, because if you don't know and you're not taking advantage of those things, you could be being charged for maybe something that's either optional or something that you don't know is an asset that you're granted access to. So you would want to take advantage of that. I'm thinking of things like, you know, your student fees often sometimes cover a student rec center, or maybe some other student activities or student life events that don't charge admission, right? So just make sure you know what those fees are and what they are covering.
Right.
So great point, Ben. Thank you. So thank you, Brittany, for framing that. Were there any other thoughts about what are OER and what are not OER? Questions? Clarification? Okay, we can always come back to that too. So I think what we're moving into, oh, and I think I might have this out of order, or no, I don't. I'm going to kick it over to Jonathan, who's going to give us a little bit more faculty perspective. And Jonathan, I stole this slide from one of your presentations.
That's great.
But it was labeled with the CC BY license, so I knew that it was open.
So it's not.
So,
yes, good. So I wanted to contribute a little bit of the faculty perspective. I guess I was surprised to hear you guys give examples of the textbooks you've used and how they weren't, I mean, they were horribly expensive, but they weren't, from my perspective, that expensive. I think I teach math here in Pueblo, and I don't know that any course, any textbook that the math department ever uses, I don't think I've ever seen one that was less than $179. And a lot of textbooks are significantly more. You know, I'd like the calculus textbook we use is, I think, more than $300 for the textbook. Many books are more in the $200 or $300 range. So I guess I want to just give the faculty, you know, how can we, from the faculty perspective, how can we stand ourselves to require our students to pay this insane amount of money for these books? And the point I wanted to make is that from the point of view of the faculty, we don't ever pay these prices. I mean, if you'd asked me a few years ago how much the books cost for the courses I teach, I would have had no idea. And the reason is that the publishers send us those books for free. So, for example, Spencer put this picture in the slideshow. This is a picture under a table in my office, where I just kind of, when the publishers send me books, I just sort of toss them under there in a not a very well organized fashion, as you can see. And when I got interested in this one day, I went through and I took a picture, and those ones that I kind of highlighted in red there, I looked all those prices up on Amazon, which is probably about the price students usually pay if you're going to buy a new book. It's maybe a little cheaper than your bookstore, maybe a little more, but it's roughly a pretty good estimate of what students would have to pay. And just those few in the front row there are nearly $2,500. The total stack of books there under that table is probably $10,000. And I didn't pay a cent for those books. So that's the reason that this whole thing is happening, is because we assign books, we have no idea how much they cost. So I think that's an important thing to keep in mind if you're trying to reach out to your professors and on your campus to try to convince people to consider trying to use these free alternatives, is that most of us don't really have any idea of the pain we're inflicting on our students in this additional side cost way. And the other thing I want to quickly mention is, even if you explain to a faculty member, oh, books are expensive, you know, we probably have been, you know, we've gone through education and maybe graduate education, and we, you know, we're not maybe as young as the average student, so we remember, oh, things were more expensive back, you know, things are more expensive today than they were back when I was a student, but that's just inflation, isn't it? So you may have trouble convincing a faculty member that those prices are anything more than just inflation, and that it was tough for us too. The thing you have to remind them of is that the cost of textbooks has been increasing at 3 times the rate of regular inflation. So, you know, it's the most expensive. It beats healthcare. It beats childcare. The rate of increase of textbooks is just insane. So all of us on the faculty side, we make these requirements, and we don't really know what we're doing to our students. So I just wanted to give that perspective. It's not that we're evil. It's just that we're ignorant. You can help change the culture on your campus, I think, by, and we'll talk about the do's and don'ts in a few minutes, but I think that the thing you have to be aware of is that most of us are just kind of ignorant of what the financial issues facing students because of our decisions are. Anyway, I just wanted to make that warning, trying to brag about us not being evil, but admit that we're pretty ignorant.
To brag about not being evil.
Can I say something, Jonathan?
Yeah.
Because what it ends up doing is, you know, we sit here and we say that we want it to be a situation where students are picking college, but it kind of makes it to where they're at a disadvantage from the very beginning. If you're barely being able to afford tuition, you're working a full-time job, you're a full-time student, and let's face it, minimum wage is not what it should be. It makes it to where a student has to pick and decide, okay, I can take this class, but maybe I can get away with not buying a book. Maybe I can go to the library and make copies so that I don't have to pay the $200 for the book. Or I can't go to school this year. I got to save up some money and work so that I can afford school next semester. What it becomes too is that publishers, I know you guys aren't understanding how much it is, but publishers are every semester putting out a new edition. And a lot of times students don't know that maybe the teacher will take an older edition. They just feel like I have to get this book because it says on the course that it's required. So is there a way that faculty can let their students know, like, hey, I understand that you have this edition, but 2 editions earlier is still good because those are the cheaper ones that you can buy?
So that's a really good point. It varies a lot from discipline to discipline. In mathematics, you know, a new edition for an algebra book or a calculus book or a statistics book comes out every couple of years. And you know, it's not like calculus has changed all that much in the last 2 years. There's no reason we need a new edition. But the bookstore tells me, we usually get permission from the bookstore to keep using the old edition for maybe another year. But then at a certain point, the bookstore says we can't buy any more of those. And the bookstore puts pressure on us not to assign an old textbook, and they may an old edition. They may be available in, you know, by word of mouth. A student who took a course before you could buy it from them used, but the publishers are very clever. They like in my discipline, you know, in the science disciplines, often the students have to do homework exercises from the end of the section, and they like put a new problem in at the beginning of the homework exercise, so all the numbers are different. So if I say do problems 7 and 12, there'll be different problems from the ones I assign in the old edition, even if they might be just at a different number. So they play games of that. Some of my colleagues work very hard to make kind of update. Here's a page of notes about the difference between 2 editions. But this is another reason to use OER. As Brittany was saying, one of the nice things about OER has a whole bunch of features. One of the things, you know, is that you can change OER, right? And you are in control of the OERs. This is another thing that might be attractive to faculty. You know, I don't have to change the book just because they've decided a new edition comes out for a commercial book. I can change it only when I feel like I want to change it. So in addition to being free, it only changes when it's necessary for the class. But you make a very good point, Alana. It's hard to in a perfect world, we could continue to use every old edition. They're trying to make it, the publishers are trying to make it as hard as possible for us to do that.
Yeah, that is a great point. And I can tell you, when I was in school, way back in the day, I bought edition 4 for an edition 5 required class, and I got an A in the class. And I didn't tell the professor, and I didn't have that conversation with the professor, you know? So I think you're exactly right. How do we build in sort of a systematic kind of like opportunity for students to have that conversation, or to communicate with professors, or for the professors to communicate with the students, or for the bookstore to communicate with everybody, and that sort of thing. So,
Alana, you made another really good point, which is that, you know, this has a real impact on people's lives. You know, you have to make your decision. Can I, with the jobs I have, can I afford to pay for tuition and the other things I have to pay for? And also, when we add on top of that, maybe unknowingly, we add some huge extra cost into our students' lives. That really has consequences. I think that's the kind of thing you can talk about with your professors and say, you know, you can use this book. It may be the best book that's ever been written about calculus, but you're going to have a bunch of students who cannot learn this beautiful material because they just can't afford to be in your class.
Well, there's also some things too, like if you've got financial aid, or if you're waiting for the VA to pay for your book, you've already started class and you're not getting that money paid out to you until 2 weeks into the course. So
Right.
You're already, once again, at a disadvantage than your classmates who started the day from day one with their book and having to make alternative things happen so that you can be caught up in your class before you're able to even afford the book when your financial aid or your VA benefits come through.
yep, that's a great point too. Yep. And that's an awesome segue into, okay, so what can we do? We know what the problem is. Nobody knows the problem more than the students, right? Because you all are going through this currently with these crazy textbook prices. And so we're going to kick it over to Dan to kind of help us step through some of this, some strategies for coalition building. So,
Sure.
Dan.
So over the course of, I probably worked with different student governments over the course of nearly 10 years at this point in time. And I think what happens sometimes is that students will become very passionate about something and want to get fast results. And part of what I try to help them do is understand how to move that passion through a process. Because there's a lot of stakeholders at play in an organization like higher education. And so if you really want to make change, you have to try to understand what's going on at all levels of the organization. And just the other day, I was having a conversation with somebody in our student government about even considering the notion of lenses, of different lenses of, you know, if you were to put on the lenses and think from the perspective of the folks who work in your fiscal department, then maybe you get a better sense of understanding of what contracts are put into place for the bookstore. Because if you have a sense of how that's laid out, that may help you to strategize differently. Connecting with the Student Life Office in particular, a lot of times the Student Life Office, they should be the ones who are working with your student government associations in a way. So whether or not the student concerns are coming from students or students in student government association, that is supposed to be a representative voice of the student body. So they should hear out to the concerns and serve as a good ally in that process. Talking to faculty, if there are faculty in particular that you have close relationships with, to get their particular lens of experience, because even as Jonathan was laying out, you know, they're moving through that system and structure in one way. And so maybe it is a matter of figuring out how to be more informative and get more folks kind of buy in. So as you're moving along that process, you're figuring out who your allies are in that particular work.
Yeah.
And then I know we talked, it's up there about the data and the human element, and I was thinking, I like alliteration, so I was thinking, what did I write down? Stats and stories, right? So depending on which lens somebody is looking through, if you're saying, I'm struggling financially, somebody who's working in the fiscal department might be looking at a numbers game. So they may be concerned overall for the financial success of the institution, but maybe a one person's story isn't enough. And so on that level, figuring out how to convey this in a numerical fashion. So when you're talking about the cost of books, figuring out what really are students paying numerically just to attend classes. How does that break down in different disciplines? How does it break down full-time, part-time? So that you actually have numbers to back up the burden. But I think it does make sense to then blend that with personal student stories. So the human element of, there may be some students who fail a class or really struggle in class because they could not get the textbook, or they had to get it late, as you were saying, or if somebody's having to make a decision between feeding themselves and or family in lieu of getting a textbook, that's a really significant issue for a student. And so if you're able to present both of those in tandem together, I think you do a better job of winning over the folks who need the numbers, as well as the folks who may need some of that human element in there. Once you have that gathered, then it's a matter of getting in front of the right folks to present that information. Because I know even as our students come forward with different passions, I'll ask them, is this your concern, or is this part of the 10,000 plus students you represent? So getting other student feedback, I think, is helpful to continue to build that case beyond the stats.
Is it a good suggestion that you have your student government create a survey that's on Banner so that other students are able to sign in and explain, or have like questions like how much are you paying for textbooks? These are situations, so that you do have the numbers, that when you do go to leadership, they have that student perspective.
Sure, and even to that point, that's another lens I think of, when it comes to surveying students. What are the institutional policies when it comes to surveying students? Will they allow it to be something that's emailed out to all students? Does it have to be marketed in a general way? Can then your student government be out in hallways with laptops, iPads, collecting that student information? But that's figuring out, once again, like, survey is a great idea. What's the institutional policy around surveying students? Because if it's more of like a general versus more specific information, the process may differ for that. But it's good to get that additional feedback from your peers to build your case.
And that's where I think, Student Life Office, Dean of Students, like you worked with, Alana, is a really good resource for students to go to. So if you're comfortable going to those offices, if not, it's a great opportunity to build that relationship. And the other thing that we talked about in preparing for this session was acknowledging your failures or your challenges. We're working with Alana to see, what are the challenges that she's coming up, because she's doing a lot of this advocacy work on her campus. And so even in our prep call for this call, I was like, wait a minute, I didn't know you were coming up against that challenge. Like, let's strategize. So we still have to acknowledge those things and say, okay, maybe we don't have that immediate win, but what are the small wins that we can have? And then what is the long-term vision to strategize for that?
And even sometimes too, I think of, there's the term best practices. So are there other institutions, other cases of students where they have been able to be successful? What did they do in order to achieve that success? And even Lisa passed along good resources with that student government toolkit that's pretty comprehensive, and that's a helpful tool to say, here's what you should do if you really want to be able to advocate for that change. And I think sometimes we get caught up in, we have an immediate passion and interest here at this institution, and we want to fix it here, versus taking a step back and doing some of that research to see what's out there that will help me to get to that proper end goal. Because I think a lot of times when students bring concerns to us, I hear it and I understand it, and it's very valid. I get the human end. For me, then it's a matter of the strategy. How do we get to a place where we get the right thing to be done for our students?
That's great, thank you. And also another great segue. So those, the toolkit that Lisa had provided and some others, we are posting those on our website for students and for faculty and staff and anybody who wants to advocate. We're not trying to reinvent the wheel, so we're not going to take something and make it Colorado branded, because there's already these great advocacy kits. I think, Alana, you went to DC and you were probably briefed on, some of these advocacy resources, but we're kind of collecting those and putting those on our OER website for the state. So we have those on the screen right now. And if you have any that you'd like to share, feel free to send them to me, and that way we can get the word out to students and others who want to advocate. So now we're kind of moving into the last portion, which are the do's and the don'ts from each of our panel experts. And so I don't know who wants to start, but we have Alana representing students, Dan representing student life, Brittany from the library perspective, and Jonathan from the faculty perspective. So I asked you all to put together a list of do's and don'ts, and we'll probably go to Q&A after this, so we can do a rapid fire do's and don'ts with whoever wants to start first.
Actually,
Alphabetical order by first name. How about that?
Are we just going to say one and then pass, or just go around, or do you want?
Why don't you just give a few of each from your perspective, and if anybody has any comments, feel free to jump in.
I know a do is, I'm not sure if every school does, but I'm pretty sure they do. If you have Q&A with your president, and it's usually like a panel of all the higher ups and leadership, and you finally get a chance as a student to bring any kinds of concerns or comments, or even anything that the school is doing good, so that the president of the school gets a chance to hear it from a student perspective. So I would suggest that you do voice your concerns to them at that time. Also, a do is what he was saying, is go to your student government and talk to them about any of your concerns and see if there's a way that they can help you implement whatever that is on campus. I would also say go to your library. If you're not able to get a class that has an OER course, maybe the library can make it to where they offer more books for you to rent, and you just rent it for a small amount of time. And they can provide more textbooks so that you're not having to go and purchase the book. That's what I have off the top of my head.
That's great. Any don'ts from your perspective too?
I would say don't go straight to the top when it comes to voicing your opinion. You would want to go through the right channels, like we were saying, going through student government and student life, going to your faculty and the staff, and then going up to the leadership instead of it being something of a passionate thing where you're already going straight.
An angry email or something like that. Yeah. That was me in college, so that's fine.
I bet.
And then also, I can't think.
That's good. No, that's good. Great. Dan, how about you next? Do's and don'ts.
I would say overall, my one big do is say do speak up and advocate for the barriers that exist that are preventing you and or fellow students from being successful. Because I think sometimes, you know, faculty, staff, we're up here and we want to talk about student success from a large level. And sometimes there's things that you all experience at the actual level of the experience that we are not aware of. And those are things we should be having conversations about and addressing. And so I'd say you definitely need to bring those up so that they can be looked at with a closer eye. What I say on the don't end of things is don't let your passion ruin relationships, because sometimes what I've experienced over time is students get really aggressive and assertive about their passions, and sometimes a student can be completely valid in their concerns, but the way they go about trying to address their concerns damages relationships. And if somebody feels attacked or put on the spot, they may also agree with what you're trying to accomplish, but the manner in which it's done may prevent that from being successful. You want to bring people on board versus pushing them away.
That's great. Thank you. Brittany.
So my first do is do talk to your librarians about what resources and services they offer. A lot of students, and to be frank, a lot of faculty members are not aware of what libraries actually offer. And that involves providing resources that are specific to courses to make sure that students have resources to complete assignments. But that also means that we're providing enough resources that perhaps the course could go OER if faculty were aware of what we had in our libraries. Also, librarians are often liaisons to specific departments. And sometimes people don't know that. So, for example, when I was in a traditional library, I was liaison to business, history, and information science. So I worked with the faculty member all the time, and we had great relationships, and that meant that those were people who I was working with regularly, and I've already kind of started those inroads, and I'm already helping with certain things in those departments. So if you're a student and you want to maybe work, your business class is really the class where your textbooks are expensive. If you find out maybe which librarian works with the business department, that's a good place to start. Also, a lot of librarians do like curation work or work with information literacy with specific instructors. So again, those relationships are already there, and so we can kind of use those relationships to help with OER. The next is to collaborate with the library on OER events. Libraries often throw events that we wish more people would come to, and we wish more people would help with, and we wish that we, more people would come to. So, like for example, the textbook broke whiteboard, those types of things. If those types of events are things that you want to do, the odds are that your library would be thrilled to co-host it with you, or to let you do it in the library space, or to work with you on those types of projects. So work with the library on those types of events. The one do not that I have would be, do not go to a librarian and say, hey, my math instructor really wants to go OER if you haven't actually talked to your math instructor about it, because we will assume that you already have, and that's a dangerous conversation when the librarian goes up to the instructor and says, hey, here's your free textbook, when you guys haven't actually talked about it. So don't do that.
Thank you, Brittany. And Jonathan, how about do's and don'ts from the faculty point of view?
Yeah, so I was thinking about this about very much in terms of the things that impinge on my life as a faculty member, and I think that Dan was saying that like data and numbers is good, but I think that one thing that is going to sound weird, but from a math professor, but I think more than numbers, what matters is personal stories. If someone, comes, so I think a thing to do is to go into a faculty member's office or a department chair or a program coordinator or something and say, listen, I really want to take this course, it's required for me, but I have this expense, which I cannot, childcare, I cannot not pay childcare, and I can't pay for that book that's being assigned, to really personalize it and tell personal stories, I think makes a big difference. I talk to my colleagues and I say that there's national data that says that in most colleges, universities around the United States, about 10% of students have experienced homelessness at some point in the last year. For me to say that to a professor who teaches a class of 35, it's a different thing if 3.5 students would walk into that professor's office and say, I had a bout of homelessness early in this year when I had to repair my car and I had a lot of expenses and I can't pay for the textbooks. I think personal stories are the do's I would really lean hard on, is tell personal stories. It can be embarrassing, but if there's anyone who's willing to share, it would really change. It can really go far to changing people's minds. In terms of do nots, I think the do not, you have to be a little bit careful. Those of us who are teachers, we think of ourselves as experts. And presumably the students do too, otherwise why would you be taking the course from us? But, so we really, I think if a student came into my office and said, this is not such a great book, I don't want to pay $200 for it. I say, come on, I'm the expert. I know if it's a good book on this subject or not. Or if a student came in and said, this is a good book, but here's another really good book that you might consider. It's just as good. I would say, again, I'm the expert. I need to make that expert decision. So I highly recommend not discussing things about quality of the resources. Talk about, hey, I hear there are these great alternatives. Maybe going and talking to the librarian, there are other alternatives which would be cheaper, and I would be able to take this class because I could pay for my childcare and also afford the class. So don't make specific recommendations and do tell personal stories. Those are my suggestions.
Thank you, Jonathan. I'll add one other do to the list for students and for anybody else who's going to watch us in the future. There are state funds available currently, so do remind people on your campus that there's $2 million in the next 2 years with which you can launch these initiatives. Because a lot of the time the conversation will become, well, it's going to be costly on the front end. And if that's the truth, that's exactly why the state has invested in this, to help motivate people and support them financially through at the beginning. So tell them to talk to me if they're interested in getting some money. We have time for Q&A, and it looks like, oh yeah, go ahead, Jonathan.
Can I just throw in one more? I just thought of one more please, to recommend.
Yep.
That if you have, when people are using OER, I think that for student group or groups on campuses, to shower with them with praise. You know, when a student has to write an evaluation at the end of a semester, if your professor uses an OER, put it in the comment section and give them an extra point in your ranking. It will really make a difference to people if you give them the feedback that this was a positive thing for your experience as a student. Anyway, just one other do.
I have one more too.
Go for it, Lana.
I would say also to bring awareness to OER, because there's so many students that don't even know what OER is or that it's even offered on their campus. So to be able to hold a forum of some sort where you do have faculty and staff there and you do have students, so that you are able to explain to them what OER is, and that the teachers are able, like you guys were saying from your perspective and the different lenses, be able to explain why these expenses are and if there are any other options specific to your school, what these options are.
That's a great point. Great point.
I have a couple of do's and don'ts as well. I forget.
Go for it, Ben.
Sorry, thanks. I think the first do that I had in mind was that I agree with all the above, because the OER resources are just these kinds of very great recommendations that you could ask for a librarian whenever you're stuck with finding a textbook. Second, it takes more than just education than the kind of success that you must provide, because I've been thinking lately during this conversation when I've been thinking of the words sigma, alpha, and pi, and because success is what provides with the students that would be in the OER courses, and also and I thought maybe a little reminder would be that in case not just education would just be that serious, that's a don't in case, is because they can't just take education very seriously, because that won't provide their step towards success that way. They would just need the power to think, because in tens of thousands of textbooks, they would say the same words of René Descartes: I think, therefore I am.
Thank you so much, Ben. That's great insights as well. And are there any other thoughts in the room, comments?
I have one thing that students might want to consider too is I might just be speaking for ACC, but it seems to be on most campuses that there are a lot of good peer-to-peer kind of programs that encourages students to kind of work with each other. A lot of times that's a good way to find resources that faculty or campus resources might not know. Just go to another student. You know, a lot of times we've taken the same classes. A lot of schools have peer mentors, peer tutors. Go and seek them out. A lot of times they'll find things just based on experience they've already had.
Great recommendation. Thank you, Ryan.
Can I add one thing? Oops, I'm so sorry. I know it's so really quick. Also, the veterans area, so offers books to veterans, and I think if you're a veteran family member, just go to the Vet Life or Vet Center, whatever you have there, and they will definitely help. I mean, it's just for veterans, but I mean, it helps.
Yes, that's certainly right. There are other advocates on our campus that we can reach out to leverage their connections and their expertise on campus. So thank you, Aisha. That's a great point. We are about out of time. One thing I want to mention is we're having a conference on May 31st. Lana is going to be leading a student session, right, Lana?
That's right.
I think we might be doing something similar to kind of a workshopping thing, but we haven't fully planned it out yet. So if you know of any students who are interested, Ryan or others, Asia, if you're interested, Ben, if you're interested, let us know. And we intend to send this presentation out to other folks too. So hopefully we can recruit some other students. If you come, your conference registration is free. We feed you breakfast and lunch. And so it'll be a day of kind of professional development for you all. You can engage with faculty and staff that'll be attending as well. Brittany?
I have one final thought, if that's okay.
You get to close it out. Go for it.
Almost every campus in the state of Colorado has an open educational resource task force made up of librarians, bookstores, faculty, administration of different levels at your campus. And if you're a student and you're trying to figure out, maybe going to individual faculty is getting some results or maybe no results, but you're looking for a place to kind of bring your advocacy and actually make a difference at a larger scale, maybe getting those grants that Spencer was talking about, or looking for people who can help bring awareness at a larger scale, or bring you into workshops at, a pre-semester launch or a student panel in front of a lot of faculty members, things like that. Figure out who runs your OER task force on your campus. At ACC, I believe it's Lisa. So that would be another plug for those librarians. And those OER task force are constantly looking for input and, data and stories. And so if you're a student and you're looking for a place to get more assistance in working on a larger scale, those OER task force are going to be a great place to get assistance.
Yeah, great point. Thank you. Thank you all for joining us. Thank you for joining us. For those of you who are joining us online, much appreciated. We're going to go enjoy some pizza, but hopefully you all will stay engaged, and thank you for calling in.
Thank you, Spencer.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.